Welcome to our third lecture on human rights theories. It is very interesting that we feel very comforted by the fact that there are human rights for us simply because we are humans. I think it's always good to remind ourselves that not everyone has got human rights as we do. Think about asylum seekers, think about children, think about prisoners who have got restricted rights. And then it is appropriate to ask ourselves then, are rights natural or are things that we socially construct to suit ourselves? We realize the importance of human rights, particularly when they are violated. That's when it becomes obvious why we need them. Think of what happened, and for some of you, you're too young to remember, but in Cambodia in the 1970s, between 1976 and 79, we had Pol Pot, who was the leader of the Khmer Rouge, kill about a quarter of the population. Think about the Nazis, Nazis. I'm always accused of not pronouncing that right. They killed up to 6 million Jews, not counting other people. They killed the gay people. They led to the death of about 20 million Russians when they invaded Russia, and so many other people that probably are still being counted. And that's an example of what happens when human rights violations go off the scale. We also need to think about, what are the theories then that inform the concept of human rights? But before that, we have to ask ourselves, what exactly is a theory? And a theory is seen as an analytical tool that can help to explain and sometimes can also be used to make predictions of what might happen in future if you do X, Y, Z. Social theories are used to explain and guide our practice. Societies have also got some theoretical, which may not necessarily be stated as a theory, but some basis that explain what they do. With the African people, for example, that I'm more familiar with, we have what is called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu simply means humanness. And in a Zulu word, it explains that a person is a person through other persons. And some of the key aspects of Ubuntu is the respect for elders and the ancestors. And that doesn't mean the other people are not respected, but there is particular reverence to the elders and the ancestors. It also emphasizes the use of dialogue, consensus, and reconciliation when you are resolving conflicts in order to maintain harmony in the community. It also supports the concept of diversity and pluralism. Now, when it comes to the human rights theories, in the article that is recommended that you read in full by Freeman, it looks at the dichotomies of things like rights and responsibilities, rights and needs, ethics and human rights. But again, even with these dichotomies, it's not always possible to make clear separations, as often you find that there are many overlaps. Now, when it comes to rights and responsibilities, it's quite an interesting topic, because you will hear many people saying, in the West, there are so many rights without responsibilities. And Mahatma Gandhi also suggested that rights need to be deserved by the performance of corresponding duties. Carr, in that article that I've mentioned, Freeman, also argued that rights implied some duties. But other theorists actually reject that concept and argue that duties should not be a precondition for human rights, that we are all entitled to human rights irrespective of what duties we have performed or are expected to perform. Now, even needs are not that straightforward. One way of looking at needs is through Maslow's hierarchy. The problem here is that if you look at needs from this perspective, then you are likely to end up having a very positivist view. For those of you not familiar with the word positivist, it's a concept that assumes that there is a reality that exists, and you can, if you are analytically good, you can analyze or research and find exactly what reality is. Other people reject that there is anything like that. They argue that reality is socially constructed. But that's a big debate to get into right now. The alternative approach is to link needs to rights, but then you look at it from a political, social, cultural, and historical context. So our needs are not static; they are based on the political situation we are in, the society we are in, and and the historical period, because in different historical periods people might conceive needs differently. Now, when it comes to the social workers, we are very committed to human rights, and International Federation of Social Workers Code of Ethics clearly recognize the role of human rights as part of social work ethics, and they argue that International Human Rights Declaration and conventions form the common standards of achievement and recognize rights that are accepted by the global community. Now, natural rights have been historically seen as the basis of human rights. But what are they? The assumption is that there are certain order in nature that provides the norms for human rights or for human conduct. So if you go back to the days of Plato and Socrates in ancient Greece, they discussed the concept of the rights of men. And in the Magna Carta of 1215, so it was called the Great Charter, that laid the foundations for the Western concepts of human rights. So during the 17th century, European philosophers were fond of advocating of natural rights of citizens, or rather certain basic rights that precede the establishment of any government. A good example is the famous one, John Locke, who lived in 1632 to 1704 in England, and he was talking about life, liberty, and estate. Again, you can see the people he had in mind were the property owners. So natural order then focused primarily on men's rights. So if you go back to ancient Greece and all the way to the French and American revolutions, the concepts of rights or human rights mainly referred to the rights of privileged males, women, slaves, non-citizens, I guess you can also put animals there, were not in the picture. But after the French Revolution, the concept of natural rights also came to apply to both men and women in equal measure. But even then, it was something that had to be fought for. A good example is this woman called Olympe de Gouges, who was executed because she was advocating women's rights during the revolution. That was before it was fully accepted as part of the revolution. So the American Declaration of Independence had that concept of natural rights. So they declared life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to be self-evident. This was further concretized by the Bill of Rights, which was very clear on civil and political rights, but completely silent on economic rights, which were later to be espoused in the International Convent on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Interestingly, as I have said in another comment in a discussion board, it was silent on slavery, but was useful later in arguing for abolition. Now, during the 18th and early 19th century, as the Industrial Revolution set in, things started to happen. A lot of poor workers in the industries were experiencing a lot of exploitation. The conditions were absolutely terrible for the workers. And that was when the famous guys, Marx and Engels, wrote the Communist Manifesto to expose the exploitation of the workers and present one of the harshest critiques of capitalism. And this critique was quite important in the start of labor unionism, and it led to the improvement of the working conditions in all countries, whether they were communist or capitalist. They benefited from this early criticism of the labor conditions. After the Second World War, there was greater awareness of humankind's interdependence, and that led to the formation of League of Nations, which was the precursor to the current United Nations, and also the International Labour Organization. And what has been the social workers' response in all this? Social workers have had also a global response, establishing intergovernmental, taking part in intergovernmental organizations, such as the UN, IMF, and so forth, and also the establishment of the international social workers organizations like IFSW, and establishing the basic code of conduct that is expected of social workers, and also emphasizing the teaching of human rights in social work. Now, there are some people who are not very convinced about the necessity of theory. David Forsyth, for example, argues that philosophical theories are inherently controversial, and that concern with theory will tend to undermine human rights practice. But Freeman doesn't completely agree with that. He feels that it's not enough to just accept that human rights are very important and they should exist without question. It's important to understand what theories might support or alternatively undermine human rights. That's important if we are to fully understand human rights and why we need them. So he thinks of, or he talks about an ideal theory, and he argues that an ideal theory does not describe reality, but puts forward reasoned arguments for certain standards with which to evaluate reality. That will allow us to know where we come short or where we would want to be. And that's very important for understanding human rights, because we often argue that, how come we have human rights but all these violations are happening? And here the argument using this concept of ideal theory is that the human rights, as we understand them, they are ideal. It is where we want to be, and we can use them as a yardstick to show where we are and where we ideally want to be. So there's nothing wrong in the fact that we are not there yet, as long as we know where we want to be. I think that is what is important, so that we can keep working on it. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were being drafted, they had to have some compromises. There wasn't any agreement on what theory that was being used. They agreed on what the human rights were, but they didn't necessarily explain why those particular rights were the ones that were important. In the article that I referred to on Freeman, Margaret MacDonald makes an argument that there is no justification for human rights simply by virtue of our humanness, nor in our rationality. She argues that natural rights are neither empirically verifiable facts nor deductively self-evident. So she argues that they are about choice. It's the choices that we make to decide this is a human right and this is not. But Freeman is cautious on that one, because he says that even choices is not necessarily convincing enough, because some people actually don't have any options or choice. So the argument that Freeman then presents is that human rights may not be perfect, they may not even be ideal, but they are important in assisting when some values that might even be superior fail. And so he argues that we do have some values that are even superior to human rights. For example, love. Love is very important, and it is what maintains, say, for instance, families. But he argues that when that fails, it's very important for human rights to kick in. Say, for instance, when there is child abuse, when parents fail to love their children and they're abusing them, then it's very important that human rights kick in and support the children. We have mentioned the issue of obligations and duties. When it comes to duties with respect to human rights, it is generally understood that governments have the duty to implement human rights. But if you look at Article 30 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it does envisage situations where non-state groups and individuals might also have some duties. And I would argue that, we probably all have the duty to protect and promote human rights. Also, there's a feminist argument that the private sphere tends to be overlooked by human rights, and they argue that that's important because human rights tend to focus on the public sphere, and that public sphere is mainly occupied by men, and therefore human rights can tend to privilege men. And then there is the issue of globalization, where corporations have become even more powerful than governments. And if we assume that obligations or duties are just with the government, then we would be letting off these corporations which are very powerful, and they should be made to uphold human rights. They should have a duty of upholding human rights. So that is it for now in terms of rights and theories that refer to human rights, and I'll be happy to continue this dialogue with you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.